The wedding band felt like a noose around Ethan Cooper's finger. 22 years old, and he was about to marry a woman who could have been his mother. Ruth Holloway. 49. A widow who lived alone on 160 acres of New Mexico dust, keeping goats and ghosts for company. The whole town whispered about it. Some called him desperate, others called him worse. But none of them knew what it felt like to stand at your father's grave and promise to keep the land, only to watch it slip away like sand through your fingers. $800. That's what he owed Samuel Garrett, the banker who held half the territory in his ledger book. $800 might as well have been $8,000. Ethan didn't have it, couldn't get it, and come tomorrow, the land his father died defending at Gettysburg would belong to someone else, unless he took Garrett's deal, unless he married Ruth Holloway, managed her land, and let the debt disappear like morning frost. Standing outside the small church in Socorro, watching the sun bleed across the desert sky, Ethan wondered if a man could sell his future and still call himself free. What kind of marriage begins with a transaction? And what kind of man does that make me? This is a story about the price we pay for honor and what we find when we stop counting the cost. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything Ethan thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and what it means to be a man. The drought of 1875 had been merciless. Ethan watched his cattle die, one by one, their ribs showing through hide stretched tight as drum skin. By winter, he'd lost 80% of his herd. The land that had sustained 3 generations of Coopers turned to cracked earth and bitter dust. He took out the loan in desperation, $800 to buy feed, to buy time, to buy hope that the rains would come. They didn't. When Samuel Garrett rode up to the Cooper Ranch that March morning, Ethan was mending a fence that protected nothing. The banker sat his horse like a man who'd never known hunger, his clothes pressed, his silver hair combed neat under an expensive hat. "Tomorrow's the deadline, Ethan," Garrett said. "Not cruel, just matter of fact. I don't want to take your land. God knows I've got enough property to manage. But the eastern banks are breathing down my neck, and I can't carry bad deeds." Ethan drove another nail, his jaw tight. "I'll get you the money." "How? You planning to find gold in that dried-up creek bed?" Garrett dismounted, his boots crunching on the parched ground. "Listen to me, son. There's another way. It's not conventional, but it solves both our problems." That's when Garrett told him about Ruth Holloway. She owned good land, Garrett explained. Her late husband had filed a homestead claim back in '68, and she'd proved it up after he died in a mining accident. But she was alone, aging, and the ranch was too much for one woman to handle. She needed help. Ethan needed to clear his debt. "You marry her, manage the property, and I forgive the $800, Garrett said. "It's a business arrangement. She gets security. You get a fresh start." Ethan stared at the banker. "You want me to marry a woman I've never met? A woman old enough to be my mother?" "I want to keep a good man from losing his inheritance," Garrett said. But there was something else in his eyes, something Ethan couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Holloway is a respectable woman, educated. She won't expect much from you. Just honest work and discretion." That evening, Ethan rode the 5 miles to Ruth Holloway's property. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Her house sat at the end of a long path, surrounded by a fence in better repair than his own. Goats grazed in a small pasture, their bells tinkling in the evening quiet. He found her behind the house, scattering feed for the animals. She wore a simple work dress, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. When she heard his horse, she looked up, and Ethan saw eyes the color of sage after rain. Tired eyes. careful eyes. "You're Cooper's boy," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Ethan Cooper. I know why you're here." She set down the feed bucket and wiped her hands on her apron. "Samuel Garrett sent you." "The answer is no." Ethan dismounted, hat in hand. "Ma'am, I haven't even asked—" "You don't need to. I know what men want, and I know what they think a widow my age should be grateful for." Her voice was steady, but underneath it ran a current of old hurt. "I don't need a husband, Mr. Cooper. And you don't need a wife you didn't choose." They stood in the fading light, two strangers bound by other people's plans. Ethan should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. This woman wasn't broken or desperate. She was angry, and rightfully so. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't want this. I want my land back, and my father's name cleared of debt. But I can't have what I want." He looked at her directly. "What do you want, Mrs. Holloway?" The question seemed to surprise her. She studied him for a long moment, and some of the steel in her posture softened. "I want to not be alone when I die," she said finally. "I want someone to care if the goats are fed and the fence holds. I want—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I want. It does to me." Ruth turned away, looking at the darkening horizon. "If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, there would be rules. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You'd have your own room. I'd have mine. We'd work the land together. But that's where it ends." "I understand. Do you?" She faced him again. "People will talk, Mr. Cooper. They'll say I bought myself a young man. They'll say you married me for my land. Can you live with that?" Ethan thought of his father's grave, of the promise he'd made. "I've lived with worse." 3 days later, they stood in the small church with Pastor Miller between them. There were no guests except Doc Hayes, the town physician, and Maria Sanchez, Ruth's Mexican neighbor who'd ridden in to witness the ceremony. No flowers, no music, just the weight of vows that felt more like shackles. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Ruth's hand trembled in Ethan's. Just for a moment. Then she pulled away, composed once more. Samuel Garrett waited outside the church, a satisfied smile on his face. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cooper," he said, tipping his hat to Ruth. To Ethan, he handed a folded document. "Your debt is cleared. I expect you to honor this arrangement." "I gave you my word," Ethan said. "Words are cheap in hard times," Garrett replied. "Actions prove character." Ruth's house was small, but well kept, a testament to 8 years of solitary determination. She showed Ethan to a narrow room in the attic space, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. "It's not much," she said from the doorway, not quite meeting his eyes. "It's fine. Thank you." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Supper's at 6. I cook simple. If you don't like it, you can fend for yourself." "I'm not picky." "Good." Another pause. "And Mr. Cooper, Ethan, I meant what I said. This is a business arrangement. Don't expect anything more from me." "I won't, ma'am." "Ruth, if we're married, you might as well use my name." The first week passed in awkward silence. They moved around each other like dancers who'd never learned the steps, careful not to touch, not to intrude. Ethan threw himself into the work, mending fences and clearing irrigation ditches that had been neglected. The physical labor felt good, honest. It gave him an excuse not to think about the strange woman who was now his wife, in name only. Ruth cooked, mended, and tended her goats with the efficiency of long practice. Sometimes Ethan caught her watching him from the window, but when he looked up, she'd turn away. They ate dinner in silence, the only sound the scrape of forks on plates. It was the goats that first broke through the ice between them. 2 weeks into the marriage, a spring storm rolled in with unexpected fury. Rain lashed the desert in sheets, and in the barn, Ruth's prize nanny goat went into early labor. Ethan woke to Ruth pounding on his door, her hair loose and wild, her eyes frightened. "I need help," she said. "The kids breach. I can't do it alone." They worked through the night in the lantern-lit barn, their hands slick with blood and birthing fluid. Ruth talked him through it, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. When the first kid finally slid free, a tiny, perfect thing, Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. "There's another one," Ruth said, and they did it again. By dawn, 2 kids were nursing and the mother goat was resting. Ethan and Ruth sat against the barn wall, exhausted and filthy. Rain drummed on the roof. "You did well," Ruth said softly. "Frank, my first husband, he was good with animals too." It was the first time she'd mentioned her past. Ethan looked at her in the dim light and saw tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "He would have liked you," she whispered. Then, as if embarrassed, she stood quickly. "I'll make coffee." But something had shifted. After that night, their silences were less rigid. Ruth began to tell him small things, where the best pasture was, which fence lines needed watching. Ethan learned that she'd come from Boston, that her father had been a professor, that she'd given up everything to follow Frank Holloway west. "Did you love him?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "More than I knew how to say." Ruth's voice was distant. "When he died, I thought I'd died too. Took me a long time to remember how to live." "Why didn't you go back to Boston?" "Because this is where we were happy. This land has his sweat in it, his dreams. I couldn't leave that." She looked at Ethan. "I know you understand. That's why you married a stranger to keep your father's land." "Maybe," Ethan said, "or maybe I just didn't know what else to do." As spring turned to summer, Ethan began to see Ruth differently. Not as the old woman he'd been forced to marry, but as a person. Complicated, wounded, stronger than she looked. She was patient when he didn't understand crop rotation. She laughed when he burned breakfast trying to surprise her. She had a sharp wit that caught him off guard. And sometimes, when she wasn't watching, he'd study her face and think that the lines around her eyes weren't signs of age, but maps of a life fully lived. It was in late June when everything changed. They were working in the garden under the brutal New Mexico sun. Ruth was bent over the tomato plants when she suddenly straightened, her hand going to her chest. Her face went white. "Ruth?" She tried to speak, but no words came. Then her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold despite the heat, her breathing shallow. Their horse had gone lame the day before, so he lifted Ruth in his arms and started walking. 2 miles to Doc Hayes' house in town. She was so light. How had he never noticed how fragile she was? "Don't you die," he heard himself saying as he stumbled down the rutted road. "Don't you dare die on me, Ruth. I'm not ready. I can't." He wasn't sure when he'd started crying. Doc Hayes met them at his door, took one look at Ruth, and ushered them inside. "Heart strain," he said. "Common in women her age, especially those who worked too hard and worried too much." She needed rest, proper food, and less stress. "How long does she have?" Ethan asked when Ruth was sleeping. Doc Hayes sighed. "Hard to say. Could be years, could be months. Her heart's weak, son. There's no fixing that." Ethan sat by Ruth's bedside through the night. He held her hand. Really held it. Not like the awkward clasp at their wedding. and watched her breathe. The thought of losing her created a hollow ache in his chest that he didn't understand. When had she stopped being a stranger? When had he started needing her? Ruth woke near dawn to find him still there, slumped in the chair beside the bed. She studied his face, young even in sleep, but careworn beyond his years. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly. He woke with a start. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Tired." She looked at their joined hands. "Ethan, I know this wasn't what you signed up for. If you want to leave..." "I'm not leaving." "You should. Find a young woman. Have a family. I don't want anyone else." The words came out fierce, surprising them both. "I want to be here. With you." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Do you think I haven't noticed? The way you hum while you cook? How you always save me the best piece of bread? The flowers you leave on my dresser, even though you pretend you don't?" He swallowed hard. "I see you, Ruth. And somewhere along the way, He stopped, unsure how to finish. But Ruth understood. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't love me, Ethan. I'm dying. Slowly, maybe, but dying all the same. You deserve more than watching someone fade. What I deserve is my choice." He lifted her hand to his lips. "And I choose this. I choose you." They sat in the morning light, and for the first time since their wedding day, they both felt married. The town, of course, noticed the change. Where before Ethan and Ruth had been a topic of pitying gossip, now they became something more scandalous. People whispered that the widow had ensnared the young man, that Ethan was playing the fool for an old woman's money. Ethan bloodied the nose of a ranch hand who made a crude joke in the mercantile. Ruth cried that night, saying she'd ruined his reputation, his life. "You gave me a life," Ethan told her. "Before you, I was just surviving. Now I'm living." But their peace was about to be tested. Samuel Garrett came to visit on a hot July afternoon. He found Ethan working in the barn, repairing harness leather. "Ethan," the banker said, his voice careful, "I need to speak with you." "About what?" Garrett shifted, uncomfortable. "I forgave your debt because I thought you'd stay a respectable time and then move on. But you're still here, and people are talking." "Let them talk. It's not that simple." Garrett's face was pained. "Ruth deserves better than this. She deserves respect, not to be the subject of cruel jokes. You're making things worse for her by..." He stopped, struggled for words. "By acting like this is a real marriage." Ethan set down his tools. "It is a real marriage. You're 22 years old. She's nearly 50. You think that's love you're feeling, but it's gratitude, obligation." "You don't know what I'm feeling." "I know Ruth," Garrett said, and there was real emotion in his voice now. "I've known her for years. After Frank died, I hoped, but she wouldn't even consider it. She locked herself away, grieving. And now you come along, young and foolish, and she thinks she has a chance at happiness again. But what happens in 10 years? 20? When she's old and you're still young? Then I'll take care of her. Like vows say, in sickness and health." Garrett shook his head. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." The banker left without another word, but Ethan knew the conversation wasn't over. That night, Ethan found Ruth sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Samuel came to see you," she said, not a question. "Yeah." "What did he say?" "That I'm too young for you, that people are talking, that I'm going to regret this. Ruth was quiet for a long time. He's not wrong. Ruth, listen to me. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight he could see the fear in her eyes. I'm 49 years old. My heart is failing. In 10 years, you'll be 32, and I'll be, if I'm lucky, an old woman who can't do anything for herself. You'll have to feed me, bathe me, watch me waste away. Is that what you want? I want to be with you, however long we have. That's not an answer. That's romance. Her voice broke. I need you to understand what you're choosing. This isn't a storybook. There's no happy ending where love conquers all. There's just time, and not much of it. Ethan took her hands. My father died at Gettysburg when I was 5. I don't remember his voice, but I remember one thing he told my mother. He said, however long we got, it was enough, because we loved true. He met her eyes. I'd rather have 5 years of truth with you than 50 years of going through the motions with someone else. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you believe me. Ruth started to cry. Really cry, not the controlled tears she usually allowed herself. Ethan pulled her close, and she collapsed into his arms, all her carefully maintained walls crumbling. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm so scared of dying and leaving you alone. I'm scared of being a burden. I'm scared that one day you'll wake up and hate me for trapping you. You didn't trap me. You saved me. He kissed her forehead. Before you, I was just a kid trying to fill his dead father's boots. You taught me what it means to actually live, to care about someone more than my own pride, to be honest about what I want instead of what I think I should want. And what do you want? You, all of you, for as long as we get. She pulled back to look at him. Even the bad parts? The sick parts? Especially those. That's when you'll need me most. They sat together under the vast New Mexico sky, holding each other like drowning people, clutching driftwood. And for the first time, Ruth let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed this second chance at love. 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Ruth sat by the window with a letter in her hands. Outside, frost glazed the desert in silver. Ethan came in from morning chores, stamping snow from his boots. What's that? Letter from my father. Ruth's voice was soft. He wants us to visit Boston in the spring. Says he wants to meet the man who made me write happy letters again. Ethan sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. Do you want to go? I'd like you to see where I came from. But the journey. She touched her chest. Doc says travel might be too much strain. Then we'll write him letters. Tell him to come here instead. Ruth smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. People are still talking, you know, about us. Let them. Don't you care what they think? Ethan considered. A year ago, I would have. I would have been ashamed, angry, defensive. But now, he took her hand. Now I realize that the only opinions that matter are ours. We know what we have. We know it's real. Real, Ruth echoed. When I was young, I thought real love meant grand gestures and poetry. But it's not, is it? It's you carrying me 2 miles when my heart gave out. It's me teaching you to read more than just ledgers. It's choosing each other every single day. Yeah. Ethan looked at her. Really looked, the way he'd learned to do. At the silver in her hair that caught the morning light. At the laugh lines around her eyes. At the strength in her face that age hadn't diminished. That's exactly what it is. How much time do you think we have? She asked quietly. Doc said maybe 5 years. Maybe less. And that's enough for you? He thought about the question seriously. It'll have to be, won't it? But Ruth, these last 6 months have been more than I had in the 22 years before. If that's all we get, then we're luckier than most people who live to be 80. Ruth leaned her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd love again. After Frank, I was certain that part of me was buried with him. But you... She struggled for words. You didn't replace him. You gave me something different. Something I didn't know I needed. What's that? Hope. The belief that it's never too late to start over. They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the desert in shades of gold. Outside their window, the land stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful, just like the life they'd chosen together. Ruth Holloway Cooper lived 7 more years. In that time, she and Ethan took in 3 orphaned children from town. Children nobody else wanted. She taught them to read from her precious books. Ethan taught them to work the land with honest hands. When Ruth died in the spring of 1884, the church was full, not with gossips and critics, but with people whose lives she'd touched. The children, grown now, wept openly. Samuel Garrett stood in the back, his face lined with regret for the words he'd once spoken. Ethan never remarried. When people asked why, he'd say simply, I had my love. Some men never get that much. I'm not greedy enough to ask for more. He lived another 40 years, and in all that time, he kept Ruth's books dusted, her garden tended, her memory alive. On his own grave marker, he had them inscribed just 5 words. He loved true. It was enough. Because that's what the West teaches you, if you're willing to learn. It's not about conquering the land or proving your strength. It's about finding something worth holding on to in a harsh world, and refusing to let go, no matter what the cost. Love doesn't care about your age or your circumstances. It doesn't ask permission from society or wait for the perfect moment. It arrives like a desert rain, unexpected, precious, and never quite long enough. But when it comes, you don't question it. You don't count the days or measure the years. You just open your hands and receive what you're given, grateful for every moment. That's what Ethan Cooper learned. That's what Ruth Holloway taught him. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Not perfection, not forever, just something real, something true, something worth the price we pay. If this story moved you, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for love. Subscribe for more tales from the untamed frontier, where courage and heart matter more than the hand you're dealt. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What's your story of unexpected love? Until next time, remember, the West wasn't won by the strongest or the richest. It was won by those who dared to love despite the odds.